Welcome to the Essential Pedagogies Toolkit, Module 3, Higher Order Thinking. Before we get going, we're going to actually use a KWL reflection. So as you know, when you see one of these toolkit signs down in the bottom here, you can use this tool yourself, but you can also use it with your students. And KWL allows us to understand what the students already know about something, what they want to learn about something, and then at the end they come back and they complete the L, which is what have you learned. So it's a really good way to track learning growth across time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to pause the video, go to your workbook, and just write down everything you think you know about higher order thinking, and then anything that you want to learn about higher order thinking. So give yourself a period of time, maybe 10 minutes or so, to do that, and then come back and restart the video. So, higher order thinking. I guess the most famous example of higher order thinking comes from Bloom's taxonomy, which is a taxonomy of cognition. So different ways of thinking, ranging from not knowing or remembering something. So just what Bloom's would call the kind of a lower order thinking, all the way up to creating or evaluating, which would be a high order thinking skill. So the important thing to remember is that just because some higher skills some skills are higher order, it doesn't mean that you only ever do them. And this is why I like, rather than having a taxonomy which looks like it's a hierarchy in a list form, I really like this visual of Bloom's taxonomy where you've actually got all of the different types of thinking together in this beautiful orange diagram. Because really, we definitely want students to remember. That's super important. Just because it's at the lower end of cognitive difficulty doesn't mean that we shouldn't be doing it. So we do want students to remember. We want them to understand. We want them to apply their knowledge. We want them to be able to analyze. We want them to be able to evaluate, so really high order critical thinking. And we also want them to be able to create, so really use everything they know and understand to create something. The other reason I really love this diagram, and it's such a useful diagram, is it has a bunch of verbs in here. So when you're thinking about writing your split screen learning intentions, you can absolutely look at these verbs here and choose some of the verbs out of the different segments of the orange to say, by the end of this lesson, you will be able to name or describe. Well, okay, that's important, but that will keep you in the remember stage of the taxonomy. But if you end up by the end of this lesson, you'll be able to prioritize or justify, then you know that some of your activities are up in that higher order thinking zone as well. So if you take nothing else away from this module, which I hope you will, but if you take nothing else away, this verb or these verbs under the Bloom's taxonomy construct are a really useful place to think about when we're planning our learning, exactly what we want the students to be doing. So one of the things I'm going to show you, and there's some examples in your workbook, are some really simple graphic organizers to really help students to think at that higher level. So if we actually think about one of the evaluate skills of being able to look for cause and effect, then we should think about using a graphic organizer that helps students to do that. So really simply is you might give students an event. So it could be an earthquake near Auckland, New Zealand, and then the students have to talk about what are the causes. Not only that, what are also the effects? Now, I do this digitally often using Google Slides because I can move these little post-it notes around, but you can do this on the chalkboard, you could do it on paper, it really doesn't matter. But what I'm going to say is, what is the cause of the earthquake near New Zealand? I'm going to say shift in a plate boundary. So, release of energy. So I might get some of those different things happening here, and then the event is the earthquake, but then what's the effect? So for example, buildings damaged. So we're really getting students to go just beyond explaining a process, but really trying to look at effects as well. So they're trying to analyze and understand the cause and effect. So homelessness, for example. So that's what just a really simple graphic organizer that you can use with students around anything. It could be even the a chemical process that happens in chemistry. It could be a biological process that happens. It could be a historical event. It could be something within a story or a play that students have been reading. It's a really powerful, really flexible tool to use. The next one I'm going to show you is really simple, is odd one out. And so what we do is we take 3 items and we say within these items, we organize them in this kind of triangle shape. And the nice thing about this triangle shape is it allows us to analyze. So again, we're thinking of that higher order thinking analysis. It allows us to analyze 3 items. Now, these 3 items could be 3 stories, it could be 3 plays, it could be 3 quotations, it could be 3 chemicals from the periodic table, it could be elements from the periodic table, it could be 3 equations in mathematics. It doesn't really matter. It could be anything, but this framework allows us to analyze it. So basically, the framework says we have the 3 items in the 3 corners. What do they all have in common? We kind of capture that and write that down in the middle. What do these 2 have in common that the other one doesn't? So, for example, this one and this one, what does it have in common? And again, you do that analysis all the way around. And then the uniqueness of each of those items sits within the triangle. So let me show you a worked example. It's probably easier. So if I had a cat, a dog, and a fish, what do they all have in common? They're all animals, we could say. Then what's unique to this item is it lives in the water. That might be something that's unique to this item. What's unique to this item? What's unique to the cat? It's from the feline race of animals. And then this one's from the canine race. That would be 2 things they've got in common. Sorry, the 2 things that are unique. Then if we talked about cats and dogs, what do they have in common the other does not? Maybe they could be house pets, but indeed you might have house pets which are fish as well. So you can get into some really interesting, quite deep analysis of this. And again, the beautiful thing is that it's not necessarily all right and wrong, but it does get students to analyze and evaluate at a higher order. And then the last graphic organizer I'm going to show you is a really simple one called a Googleable and ungoogleable. Now, this is really important because we want our students to ask questions. We want our students to be really good at asking questions, but there are different levels of order questions to ask. So what we're going to do here is just use this graphic organizer to talk about climate change and think about what are the Googleable questions we can ask about climate change. So what are those things, for example, that we could find out just by looking them up on the internet or in a textbook or something? Well, it might be, for example, what is the definition of climate change? It's actually quite a challenging one, but we'll put it up there anyway. Sorry. What's the definition of climate change? And again, you can just do this on a board. You don't need to do it with post-it notes or anything. You can just do it on a board. What is the average ocean temperature since 2010? So we got these kind of Googleable questions. But then we also want students to think about ungoogleable. Ungoogleable tends to be that higher order. It tends to be analysis and effectiveness. And so you might ask things like, is it right to have targets on carbon emissions? Okay, so that brings in a little bit more of ethics and exploration than that you get from just Googling. For example, you might argue that for some economies that depend on building their economy based on carbon, then it's not fair that they have the same emissions targets as other economies which are maybe more mature. And then what would it feel like to live in a world which is on average 2 degrees warmer? Again, exploring, analyzing, evaluating, even creating narrative there. So ungoogleable and ungoogleable is a really simple but effective way to get students to think at that higher order level. All right, so that was a real quick look through Bloom's taxonomy and some graphic organizers, which are just really practical ways into higher order thinking. So my challenge to you is the following. Choose one of the thinking tools above, or there are bunches more of them if you have access to online at bit.ly/thinking canvas. So choose one of those thinking tools and use it with the class. Debrief with the class how it went. Did it make them think differently or more deeply? And then share your resource with your colleagues and encourage them to give it a go. So now you should have done your K and W of your KWL. You should have written down what you already knew about higher order thinking, what you want to learn about higher order thinking. And what I'd love you to do now is just to take a pause before you go on to the next module and write down, what did you learn? Did you learn anything new in that module?